Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you to have another author interview to talk about another book. I do want to say, before we get to the interview with author Patricia Eagle, I do want to give a trigger warning. This is a memoir. It is about sexual abuse, so if that is a trigger for you, do please take care of yourself and, don't listen to this interview. It's going to be triggering for you. Just want to make sure that that is transparent before we start. So as I said, the author is Patricia Eagle, and this is her memoir. It's called Being Mean, a memoir of sexual abuse and survival. Patricia is 13 when her sexual relationship with her father, a relationship that began when she was 4 years old, ends. As a young woman, she dreams of love, but shame, depression, and the confusion of suppressed memories send her careening through life. As a grown woman, she finds strength to see what was unseeable, and finally speaks the unspeakable to help herself and others. That's the description of the book, and it really doesn't do the book justice in its scope. At times, I found the story difficult to read. I mean, obviously, it's kind of horrible to read about this sexual relationship, this sexual abuse that was happening for such a young child, and that's always difficult. And then the consequences of those early years and how it affected Patricia's life. I just wanted to reach through the pages so many times and hug that young woman who came out of that situation. But at the same time, even though there were times when it was difficult to read, it's also this beautiful story of survival and resilience and hope. Patricia is very honest, very open, very thorough in her examination of what happened and what the results were and how her life, how the trajectory of her life changed because of not only those early experiences, but how she repressed the memories, how those memories came back, how she reacted to them, etc. So this has really affected a huge chunk of her life, and walking with her through her story is at times difficult, but it is so, as I said, beautifully written. It is so well written, and I really, even when there were times when I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know if I want to continue with this book, I felt my empathy had kicked in so much, and I just, like I said, wanted to reach through the pages and affect some kind of change in the story that I was reading. But even then, I still wanted to read and find out how Patricia was going to come out of this situation, because obviously she's writing a memoir, and obviously when you read the back, you can see that she's writing this to not only help herself but to help others. And so that really kept me going through the book to find out where she found those moments of light and joy and hope, and how she learned to deal with everything that had happened in her life. So let's go ahead now and turn to the interview with Patricia so that she can tell you her story. Before we get to the interview, though, I do have copies of this book to give away, advanced reader copies. So if you are interested, after you hear the interview, in reading this really wonderfully written memoir, then stay tuned to the end of the podcast to find out how you can win a copy of Being Mean by Patricia Eagle. Hi, Patricia. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. I am glad to have you here, and we are here to talk about your memoir. It's called Being Mean. Before we get to the book, though, if you could just share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, that would be great.
All right, I'm willing to do that. Sarah, that question always makes me think. I taught high school for several decades, and when my students became seniors and were graduating, and the question of what am I going to do would come up amongst them when they're deciding on college, I used to ask them, let's consider first how you're going to be, and who are you? So not just what you're going to do or what you do. So when I hear that question, I often want to paint a picture of who I am in the way of I'm someone who walks on a levee every morning, nice, long, quiet walks where I look at birds and I just have time to reflect and enjoy the silence and the song of birds. And I'm also a gardener, and it's something I love doing. I raise a lot of our food that my husband and I eat, and then I also raise a lot of flowers that I don't really pick to put in the house because I just enjoy walking through the garden and absorbing their fragrance and their beauty. And I'm also a loyal friend and a dedicated spouse. I'm dedicated to the relationships that I have with all those people and having open and honest conversations with them. Then what I do, I'm a first-time author of a memoir, as you mentioned, and very, very happy to have done that and completed it. I'm also a life cycle celebrant, and that means that I write the stories of people who have died or of couples getting married, and then I weave those stories into ceremony and officiate those ceremonies, memorials, or weddings. And I'm also a story gatherer, and I'm gathering stories of resilient women and telling those stories, writing those stories, because I think it helps us all to hear those stories. Mm-hmm. So does that fill in a picture for you?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So can you give us a brief overview of the book, Being Mean?
Well, let me first start out with the title. So Being Mean is a memoir of sexual abuse and survival. And being mean was what my mother called masturbation. So it's being, B-E-I-N-G, mean, M-E-A-N. And I didn't realize, I did not know the word masturbation. My father and I did that together from my age of 4 to 13. How my mother came up with calling it that, I can really only guess. I did hear her accusing my dad of being mean to me, so I don't know if that's where she got that or not. But from what my father and I did together, I became a compulsive masturbator, and she would be mean. But that title also in my memoir, I feel like is reflective of my father's temper, also his mental illness, both of which caused him to be mean, controlling, powerful, punishing, shaming. And so that title also fits that behavior. And then a third way that I feel like that title is so appropriate for my book, and my publisher chose the title, not me, and I wasn't sure about it right at first, but I've come to realize how reflective it is of my story. I was also mean to myself for years. I became very hard on myself and sabotaged so many parts of my life and ways to be mean to myself because I did not feel worthy of love and joy and life going smoothly, I felt like that I needed to be punished because I slowly had learned that what my father and I did was wrong. And then as I suppressed my memories, I could feel a heaviness inside of me, even though I didn't know, I couldn't connect the dots any longer, but I knew how to be mean to myself, to be shaming of myself. So that's much of what my book's about, Sarah. It's an accumulation of 67 stories, I believe it is, that I did not write chronologically, but they are stories that illustrate not just the abuse, but they're also stories that I hope, and from what I hear from people, illustrate the victory of human spirit over those challenges that life can throw at it, certainly that life threw at me.
Right. And you write with just such honesty and openness about your experiences. At times it was difficult to read some of the earlier parts of the book for me because, you've outlined what happened and then how you repressed or suppressed those memories to survive, really. And so to see the you being mean to yourself, kind of some of those self-destructive behaviors you were exhibiting before you realized why some of those things were occurring, just it's beautifully written, but just I just wanted to reach through the pages and hug you or say it's okay, there's reasons behind this.
Yeah, I understand. I appreciate you bringing up how there are details in my book, and I feel very strongly about including those details because it was helpful for my own recovery, but I very much, my other intention for writing my book was that it would help others recognize how they could help people, like you mentioned, that might have suffered sexual abuse themselves, or those people that are victims or survivors, and how they might recognize their own trauma through hearing those details. I also feel strongly about that because I've learned through reading and listening to films and documentaries that have been made around sexual abuse that there is a lot of pushback from people about talking about the details. I believe if we don't talk about the details, then people don't really grasp how harmful this is. I mean, it's such a pervasive problem that's been going on for centuries across the world, and we receive such support for being complicit and being silent. Not talking about it. Just move on. We don't really need to hear about that. I mean, there are people that received, if we want to speak to Christine Blasey Ford, who received death threats for including her story in the confirmation hearings for a Supreme Court justice. Or if we talk about the two men that were in the documentary Leaving Neverland, who spoke up about their sexual abuse for a big pop star, Michael Jackson, and they still, all of them, even Blasey Ford, are still receiving death threats for speaking up and telling their story. I know #MeToo is a popular movement, but it's not hard to find stories amidst the ones that women and men are telling about sexual abuse or harassment. It's not hard to find the stories about the threats and the harassment that they receive for speaking up and telling their stories. It's time to do that and not to shame people for doing that.
Yeah. So is that part of what inspired you to write a memoir about your experiences, or how did that process go?
I don't know if you're to the place where my husband and I made the decision to actually go and live with my parents who were needing care in their elder years. And one of the reasons that we chose to do that was that I felt like it would be a really fertile ground, as it was, to forage my story and to have things come up so that I could finally write my story. First of all, I wanted to write it for myself and my own recovery and healing. And oh my goodness, it did do that. And a lot more. And then second of all, this was before #MeToo, way before it. I started my book in 2010. And I also cared about, well, how could this help other people? Because I had been speaking about my memories since I was 38. And at the time I began writing the book, I was 58. And I had people, in secret and hushed voices tell me their own stories. And I thought, well, if I feel like that it could help people to tell their stories and give voice to what their secrets and what they've hidden, then I need to do that as well. So I started, but it was so challenging and so difficult, both the experience of living with my parents as well as writing my story, that I did put my story aside until 2017. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I had attended to my parents' care and their deaths and a move that my husband and I made. And also I had to attend to becoming grounded and feeling my own mental health improve after that experience. Mm-hmm. And then I picked the book back up. And coincidentally, I finished writing it. I picked it up in January of 2017. And I wrote every day, almost every day, until August. And I had my first manuscript at that point and submitted it to different publishing companies and to my first readers and to an editor and got the ball rolling. And #MeToo came to the surface in October of that year. And I was so glad to feel like a part of that.
I'm going to jump in here so we can go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, more of Patricia's story. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. On this first break, I want to talk to you about Care Of, the vitamin delivery service that sends you a personalized selection of vitamins and supplements directly to your door. It's wonderful. You don't even have to leave your house. You don't have to go wander the vitamin aisle trying to figure out what supplements and vitamins might be best for you. You simply go to their website, takecareof.com, do a quick 5-minute questionnaire survey, and they will put together a personalized package of vitamins that you can then add to and customize specifically to your own vitamin needs. It is wonderful. I got this wonderful box in the mail. Everything had my name on it. It was all customized to what I indicated were my health goals, and I really loved the service when I tried it. So if you're interested in trying this, just go to takecareof.com and enter the promo code Book Review. You'll receive 20% off of your first order. Again, that is takecareof.com and enter the promo code Book Review. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Patricia Eagle about her memoir, Being Mean.
Can you talk a little bit about the experience of writing it? Did you find it eventually, was it cathartic, or was it more triggering through the process?
Sarah, it was both. It was both. I would say that it was mostly cathartic. It was freeing. I freed my voice. I wasn't hiding anymore. I released the shame. I often say at readings that how good it feels to be open about who I've been, who I am now, and who I'm becoming. And since you've read most of my book, you know, I literally don't have any secrets anymore. I mean,
Right.
I expose myself, and that's quite an exposure coming from someone that lives in a remarkable community that is small. There's only 10,000 people in my community. At my book release, it was packed, and
Oh,
the response was amazing. But it's cathartic, and there's a part of me that just doesn't care about my secrets being out there anymore, because I feel like that I'm finally freeing my voice. But it did, writing my book, it absolutely, it triggered more memories, and it triggered sadness for that little girl, that confused little girl, and then that confused young woman, and even older woman who just wanted to be loved and just didn't understand how that would come about or what that meant. Didn't understand how to have self-compassion and love herself.
hmm.
So both cathartic and triggering, but mostly cathartic.
Okay. And how do you feel like, coming out with everything and having no secrets? Do you feel like it's helped you to reconcile or come to terms with some of your past relationships that were difficult?
When you ask that question, are you thinking mostly the relationship with my parents?
Um, Parents, I mean, parents
Or
to a certain
just,
extent, but or even past relationships with because I think I mean romantic relationships because you went into those with
yeah.
a certain mindset because of your experiences that you didn't understand
Mm-hmm.
yet. So do you feel like
Mm-hmm.
you've kind of maybe come to some terms with those relationships now that you understand more of your early years?
Well, I think I've come to terms with some aspects of it. Believe me, there are, I think of, I'm not in AA, but I really appreciate it. And I think of there's people I love that have done it, and they have that making amends step. And I will say that I probably have some people, I do have people that I could make amends with. And I also think that there are a lot of men out there that could make amends with me, men that I was in
Mhm.
relationships with. When you talk about coming to terms with them, I don't think I have not come to terms, well, except with my husband, who we were married 12 years, divorced 12 years, and we've been married 13 years. And obviously we've made amends with one another in an incredible way, where we've established and pursue open, honest relationships and or conversations ongoing, and not holding back and stuffing things down. But with other men that I was with, particularly with the men with whom I became pregnant, I think how important it is for women to speak up about the responsibility that men have around sex and pregnancy. That it
Mhm.
shouldn't just be women that are blamed or expected to be solely responsible. When they get pregnant, I'm very confused about that around the whole abortion issue. Now I hear a lot of talk about women and their responsibility, and how they should be punished. There's hardly any talk about men, and women do not get pregnant alone. So
Right.
I think about that with the men that I was with, and how they could have been responsible in some way. I mean, they were responsible, but how they could have helped out, whether it was me getting an abortion, or if a woman is going to put a child up for adoption or have the child, and men just seem to disappear, not letting them get off the hook. I don't understand why it's so easy for them to get off the hook. Even around child sexual abuse, which is largely men. I think it's 89% are men. There are women that abuse as well, sexually abuse, but it's largely men. And when I look at that and think, if it's 1 in 4 women that are sexually abused and 1 in 6 men, 1 in 10 children are raped by the time they're 18, that's a whole lot of perpetrators out there. Why aren't we doing more about locating them and helping them and guiding them? And I am not sure. I'm not an expert on this. I'm just reading more and more. Since I wrote my story, first I was just writing my story. I really didn't write it to be on a crusade against child sexual abuse. I wrote it for recovery and to help other people that have been abused recover. But now I'm into this. Well, why is this happening? Who's doing this? Why aren't we doing more? And honestly, Sarah, at this point, I don't know. I read sex offender newsletters and some of the treatment they're doing. And the only thing that I can pin it on right now is the pervasive nature of patriarchy and the power and the privilege that comes with that and the ownership of children and women by men. It's the only thing that I'm able to see, but I am open to hearing more reasons. But that's what I come back to. And so when you ask me about how my memoir has helped me to come to terms with past relationships, that's where I come back to, especially with those romantic relationships, at least with men, because as you saw in my book, I also had relationships with women, and I identify as a bisexual, although I'm in a monogamous relationship with a man now. But I know that I am still bisexual. I did not have those issues with women at all of power and privilege, but with men, in fact, with the women that I was in relationship with during the time that I was, during my life, it was not at all about power and privilege. And there was a mutual acceptance of responsibility, much more so of the relationship, and was with sex and sexual pleasure. And I did not experience that at all. I experience it now with my husband, but that's that open, honest relationships that we have. And you may not have gotten there yet, but I do include that. I include our sexual relationship. As elders, we're in our 60s, our late 60s. And I include that in the book because, one, I want survivors of sexual abuse to know that you can achieve that place of ease and affection and intimacy with someone. It is possible if you do your work. And also, what it takes is having open, honest conversations about love, about what gives each of us pleasure. And I also included it in there because I think people ought to know that it's possible to keep enjoying sex in your later years. Well, why not?
Right. What? No. Some people might be shocked to hear that.
All of this too brings. I'm talking too much. Let me let you have a question.
Oh no, I just was thinking, in terms of coming to terms. I guess also I was thinking for a long time, love and sex were conflated because you felt closer to your dad during those your special times, as I think he called them, but then afterwards he would be shaming or angry, and so it really got messed up in your mind as far as love and sex. And I think your first relationship with Dave went on probably way longer than it should have because of those feelings. So it sounds like you've really worked through those issues to clarify in your own mind that love and sex aren't always the same thing.
Hallelujah. Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
But
So,
I could have, done, I've seen people make different choices where they don't work on their history. Having written this book, I have so many people disclose their own history of sexual abuse. Surprisingly, some of my very good friends, I do have a lot of good friends, which, like I said before, I learned how to do that as a child so I could get out of my home, and I wanted to explore what family and marriage was for others. So I have learned how to do that, and I've had several good friends disclose their own sexual abuse that they've not talked about.
Sorry to interrupt. We did have some connectivity issues, and so a bit of the interview got lost. And in order to make the next sentence make more sense, I just need to say that Patricia, is talking about people have shared their own experiences with her, and that so often people are either told or made to feel that they should just ignore those experiences or shove them down, not pay attention to them, kind of ignore them.
That you'll get on with it, with your life if you just ignore that. But I don't think that's really the case. I see that manifest in other ways, from depression to anxiety to migraines to all kinds of things, for stuffing it down. But what a shame to miss the opportunity to learn how to be an open and honest relationship. Or some of the people that I've seen what they've done with their history of sexual abuse is to isolate themselves and be recluses or not be in relationships. And even though I'm an introvert, I love being loved, and I love loving. And I've wanted that to be possible in my life, and I'm very grateful that it has been. And it is.
I think that is a very positive and affirming spot to go ahead and take our second break of the podcast. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I hope you are enjoying this interview with author Patricia Eagle. I know I had a great time speaking with her, so let's go ahead and get back to that interview.
So when people hear your story and maybe it inspires them to tell you their story, what do you say in those situations? Do you I'm not sure. Let me think of how I'm trying to phrase this question. Do you try to tell them the things that you wish people had been able to say to you?
Well, what I actually do most of the time, like at the beginning of a reading, when it's an in-person situation, I have begun letting people know that I handle my own story with a particular fragility, right now. I'm still learning to handle it and share it publicly. I mean, this is a big deal to be talking about all these aspects of my life with strangers. And I tell people that in that public setting that I'm really not in a place to hold their story as well. It's difficult for me to hear. I've had people approach me and go into great detail in their story, and there's often a line of people waiting to have their book signed. And my heart hurts so much when people tell me these stories that then I become very distracted and anguished. So I tell people that there are resources in the back of my book, and if they can't buy the book, there are resources for my free bookmark. There are resources on my website, and I encourage people to seek help. Please, to seek help, to seek guidance, preferably through therapy. But there are all kinds of Stop It Now, RAIN. Oh, let me look in the back of my book. In Colorado, we have the Wings Foundation, where people can go and have a hotline that they can speak to someone. There's also the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. So it's an anonymous hotline where perpetrators can call and get help and hopefully get some therapy. That's a very difficult thing for perpetrators because once they self-identify, I don't know enough about it once again, but it's hard for them to get treatment because they have to be reported. So there are all kinds of considerations and resources for people to get. But what else do I say? I think I said earlier, these kind of experiences fester in our bodies through the, depression, migraines, anxiety, shame, things that keep us from living fully. And so I encourage people to seek help and to speak up and to find their voice, because that's what I believe will help us move toward change, and that will help people. I mean, look how many people this is. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men, and all the perpetrators. That's a lot of people that are hurt, that are injured.
Yes. This is slightly off topic, but it's something that I wanted to ask you about. There is a definite connection between you and birds in the book. Can you talk a little bit about the birds?
Well, let's take a break and talk about birds. That's a good idea. Birds my first word was bird. We had a parakeet that flew around our house. And so I don't know if as a child, I was loath to begin talking, probably because of the anguish and certain amount of violence in my home. So I watched, my eyes learned to watch birds from an early age and listen for them. I don't know, birds ground me. They connect me to nature. I love listening to bird song. And as you know, I did some research on that in college. It just helps me be aware of the beauty that is around me. On those mornings when I talk to you, my morning walks on the levee, where I really prefer to walk alone and in silence. And so I see the same birds at different times of the year. I don't know if they're the same birds year after year, but I'm pretty sure they're the same birds in a season. And like there's a female red-winged blackbird that is in the same place and then follows along with me. And there's a swallow that hovers right above me and says good morning. And these aren't unusual things if you pay attention to birds. And can you imagine the joy that winged creatures they make me happy and just make me always remind me how beautiful life is. And during those times as a child, when I used to roam and wander way beyond my boundaries. Actually, I dangerously did so. I took risks. Sometimes I wished something would happen to me. And out there roaming and wandering, I just followed the birds until I got lost, or just noticed them, watched them, and then didn't know where I was. They helped me lose myself. Mm-hmm. Now they just help me center myself in beauty.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. You mentioned this a little bit in your when you were introducing yourself, but can you talk a little bit more about the storyteller and the celebrant aspects of your work?
I went through the training to be a life cycle celebrant at the same time that I began writing my book. So it was, I think, the two coincided quite beautifully, because I was encouraged to look carefully at people's stories, their stories of love, or, a couple getting married, or the story of life that someone had lived as I wrote their memorial. And I think it helped me look at my own life too. I did work with a writing coach, and he used to tell me, where are you staying hidden in your own story? Or what would your story be if you weren't trying to make yourself look good? With my couples, because I found that they often went into the romantic version of their story, and I would use it in helping them determine their vows also. What are you really wanting to promise one another? What do you want to promise, and what do you want to be promised? And the real thing, let's go to the authentic level. And that really happens a lot when I work with people who are wanting a memorial, and we look at the life that someone lived, and not just all the glory of their life or the polished version, but making them be real. Where did they struggle? What were their challenges? That makes us feel more attuned, I believe, to someone's story than just that glorified version of their life, that everybody loved her and she was just always had a smile on her face. And I think, really? How did she do that? Even my friends that haven't been sexually abused, they don't always have a smile on their face. We all have challenges. And so that, bringing that aspect of how was that person resilient? How has your relationship become resilient? Or how do you want it to become resilient? And that sort of ties into what I hope to begin working on next for my next book. And that is that I want to tell people's real stories as a life cycle celebrant. And also, I want to gather women's stories of resilience. Tell me what you've really struggled with. How have you become resilient? Not just the polished up, Botox, face-lifting story, but the one that you lived. How do you wear your story? And I realized if I want people to tell me their real stories, I had to write my real story. And my writing coach, my first stories, he would read them. I would send them to him, and we'd have our scheduled times, and he'd be like, okay. And I'm like, oh, you don't like that story? He goes, well, you look good, you sound good, but what would the story be like if you weren't trying to make yourself look good?
Oh, it's just an interesting question to ask in this day and age with like social media and how we tend to only put the best pictures of ourselves on social media, or we don't put the hard stuff out there.
Yeah, that's so true. But I want our young women to really understand how we can become stronger and more empowered as women, or all people, men and women, how we can become more empowered by being honest about our pasts and our life stories. Certainly in a relationship, I don't think we have hope to survive in a relationship if we aren't honest with one another. And it's a constant flexing of that muscle, that honesty muscle. It's not a one-time thing. Okay, I told you my story, I'm done.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It's a constant. Yeah, I know.
Where's the easy button?
Oh, man. I've looked for it, believe me.
I'm serious. I really do want that easy button. Not just whatever commercial that is. What is it, Staples? No, I want the real one, the one that you just pop, and then I think you'd have to use it sparingly. But, just sometimes, can we just make it easy? Let's instead take our final break of the podcast, and when we come back, we'll be talking more about the collection of women's stories of resilience. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion to my interview with author Patricia Eagle. Before the break, we were talking about the collection of stories of resilience, of women's stories of resilience that she is collecting. So let's go ahead and get back to that interview.
So do you envision that as like an anthology of telling women's stories of resilience?
I do. But here's what I'm encountering so far. Oh, I encounter resilient women, believe me, especially in this valley, San Luis Valley, where I live in southern Colorado, because there are some tough women here. Women that are out herding sheep on their own in their 70s and 40 degrees below zero, and they raise children in a little trailer by themselves. And I can just go on and on. And not just those kinds of stories, but other stories as well. But people are reluctant to be honest about their story. There's shame often. There's a desire to stay hidden. And I'm sorry about that, but I understand, because I think we like the facade of, I'm okay, I have it together, look how good I look, and I got this smile on my face, so I'm, nothing wrong here, nothing to see beneath this smile. But that's not really going to help the people looking for mentors and models and honesty, and that you can be a really good person and have or abortions, or you can still be a strong, worthy model and have made mistakes in your life and explored a lot. Those are the women that I hope to tell their stories.
Well, I think you model that well in your book. There's a strong aspect of spirituality in your book, where you do go through the therapy and you do the hard work, but you also pay attention to the spiritual aspect of yourself with meditation and prayer and really trying to center and connect yourself in your own body, in your own life.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I realized that my encouraging people to get therapy, that for me, I'm coming from a place of privilege, because as a school teacher, I had insurance. It paid for 10 therapy sessions a year, like that would be enough. But, I had an income, I had insurance. So and I wish everybody had that. I wish that we granted mental health care for whoever needed it. I feel very strongly about that. But there are things you can do that don't cost money. The websites that I mentioned, that Stop It Now and RAIN, Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, and then meditation and prayer. Meditation to me is learning how to listen for guidance, and prayer is when I ask for guidance. I actually speak to God, and I do believe in God. I'm an on-again, off-again Christian, but I have a belief in God because I need it, and it's helped me a lot. And I need meditation. It's helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned going to church as a kid, but the spirituality in the book is not, I think people of all spiritual walks could read the book and not feel like you were espousing any one doctrine. You're very open in your spirituality.
You could call me a Buddhist, pagan, on-again, Christian. I get called a lot of things.
I would call you someone who learns about your spirituality from your dogs sometimes.
Absolutely, dog is God spelled backwards, and for me,
yes, there are some very, very sweet moments.
Very supportive in my life from the early age, as you know from reading my book. My dog really did provide me huge comfort, and still do.
Yes. Now you've always journaled throughout your life. When you started writing your story, did you think about writing it for publication, or was it more for your own personal experience, and then it grew into something that you thought about publishing?
Yeah, it grew into something I thought about publishing. And it was very different than my journals. My journals are places where I reflect and, do the cathartic kind of writing. They are not literary in any way. But I started journaling when I was 7 years old. And for my dog, I was it was like my dog's baby book. But I journaled about what we did together. And then I kept journaling and ended up doing research on journaling for a master's thesis. And so when I began writing my book, it was really for my own recovery. I felt the need to excavate my life, particularly because we'd gone to live with my parents, which I don't recommend if you've had the experience I had, but that's what we did. And it did help me. And then at my therapist, I kept sending my pieces to my therapist, and he would say, gosh, I can see this as a book. I can see this as a film series, and I would be like, okay. But I just kept moving along with it. And then I did get to that place. I put it all aside and picked it up again about 6 years later and finished my book. And at that point, when I picked it up, I went, I'm writing a book. This is going to be a book. I had 50% of it written, and I finished the remaining 50% within 6 months. And that was writing almost every day. and it just poured out of me. And at that point, I knew that I had a purpose that was beyond my own recovery, that I had a purpose of writing that I felt like indeed could help others.
And when you take the time to read for yourself, do you have favorite authors or genres that you like to read?
I take the time to read all the time. I'm a voracious reader. I'm always reading. In fact, I'm looking over in my studio and I have a pile of books right now. I have 10 books over there. But favorite authors, I used to read Annie Dillard a lot. I don't read her anymore. I don't think she's writing more, but she had a mix of theology and nature studies. And Pema Chodron, When Things Fall Apart. Whew, I had a lot of things falling apart in my life, and she's a Buddhist writer that helped me. And now I'm in a theology book club. They've been meeting for 40 years. And Brene Brown, we read her, Braving the Wilderness. And I like how she equates vulnerability with courage. And she puts shame in its place. And I like writers that put shame in their place. And Eve Ensler just came out with an incredible book, The Apology. That's a memoir with a different kind of approach to working through the abuse experience. I like pretty much anything Eve Ensler does because she's an activist, and thank God for them. And Roxane Gay wrote Hunger, and she's an occasional opinion editorialist in the New York Times, but she said something about the only way to really elicit change and progress is to get involved with the messiest parts of life. I read her, I think, while I was writing my memoir, and I got some encouragement for getting messy, getting in those messy parts of life. So anyone that I'm reading, I receive inspiration from, and if I don't, I put the book down. Pick up another one. I'm reading right now. Let me just move this forward. Why Does Patriarchy Persist? And I'm being inspired by that. Trying to learn a little bit more, as I mentioned earlier, about why do these things continue.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for that.
Yeah, lots of authors. And there are so many good writers out there in the world. So many good memoirs, too.
So many good books, not enough time.
Yeah, I know. But if you don't like it or you're not inspired, I say put it down and pick up the next one. And I hope that from what I hear from people, and I'm hearing from more and more people, and they say that they're inspired by my courage, and I'm glad. It's having that courage that's another muscle that I'm trying to have, to have the courage to trust being truthful. That's who I dedicate my book to all those with the courage to trust being truthful and speaking up. And I'm glad that people are feeling that. They're feeling inspired to look at their own stories when they read my book. And that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. You've mentioned that you have a website, so can you give us the address to the website and if you have social media that people might interact with you?
I do. The website is my name, patriciaeagle.com. And Facebook is, I don't know how you give addresses for Facebook. Patricia Eagle on there, or also I have an author site, Patricia Eagle Writes. So I do post articles and interviews on both of those. I'm on Instagram too. I don't remember the address. Okay. You can see that those are things that I work at. But I probably spend more time reading and writing than I do getting on both of those. But I do try to keep them current with all of them, with articles and interviews and readings that are coming up. PatriciaEagle.com. That'll get you to a lot of places, and it'll also, my book's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Indie Books, and all of those links are on my website. But everyone knows you just have to go to BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com. I do want to mention that I have an audiobook that is excellent. Tavia Gilbert reads, and she does a wonderful job. She moved me when I listened to it.
Well, I just logged onto your author Facebook page, and I saw that, so I was about to ask you, but you beat me to it.
Well, good. That's because I love listening to books as well as reading. You know, I listen when I'm out on an indoor bike, or I listen in the car. And I think even hearing books out loud is a very, very moving experience. Not just my own book. I'm listening to Lori Gottlieb's right now. You Really Should Talk to Someone is the title of her book. In her book, I just laugh, and it's a different thing hearing the words.
Yeah,
I like both hearing and reading them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, me too. Well, we have talked about a lot of different topics today. Is there anything, though, that we haven't covered that you would like to mention about the book or writing in general? Well,
I want to emphasize that my book, my story, is just one way that sexual abuse can happen to someone, and how that person can survive the consequences of that abuse on someone's life. And that most of my story is about the survival and how I came to acknowledge that sexual abuse and to live with it and to live beyond it. And that it's possible. I've heard it called being a beyond survivor. So you're a victim when you're a child, you become a survivor when you begin, your memories surface and you begin working with it. And then when you reach that point in your life when you still have your memories, but there's room for joy, and you become a beyond survivor. And that's what I believe my book offers, a way to get to that place. And I encourage anyone that loves someone that's been abused or that's been abused themselves, or that just cares about this in our culture, that they read the book and that they let their voice be free, and that they become a beyond survivor, or helping people that want to be that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for taking the time today to speak to me about not only your book but your experiences. I really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate what you're doing, Sarah, and giving people like me a platform for bringing this up.
Again, thank you so much to Patricia for taking the time to speak with me, to being so open about her story and sharing it so that others can hear her story and maybe take some courage from it, or take some hope from it, whatever they may get out of her story and her experiences. I really, really appreciated her taking that time and also writing the book. So if you are interested in a copy of this book, you can enter to win one. All you have to do is go to our social media pages, GSMC Book Review, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and comment on this episode. It is episode 167, Interview with Patricia Eagle. Find those posts on social media and comment. Please do, like and follow and do all those great things as well, because that is very helpful. But if you'd like to win a copy of Being Mean by Patricia Eagle, you just have to go to Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram and comment on this the link with this episode 167. So thank you again to Patricia. Thank you, as always, my listeners. I appreciate you oh so much. My fellow bookworms, I cannot tell you what a lovely club we belong to. Too bad we could not, we just can't all be together to discuss books, but I guess this will have to be the next best thing. So thank you as always, and please join me again next time for another episode of the GSMC Book Review Podcast. In the meantime, have a wonderful week, and make sure you find some time to get yourself lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.